Last time on the Skip and Josh podcast.
I did mention, or maybe you mentioned, so yes, I am in Montreal right now, but just so the listeners are aware, we are still physically distanced. In fact, we're probably 20 kilometers away from each other, so we're nowhere near each other, even though I'm in the same city as you.
You're listening to the Skip and Josh podcast with Skip Sherman and Josh Obadia.
Okay, Skip, so we're going to talk about our favorite sports announcers of all time, not current ones.
Well, they could be current.
They could be current. But before we get to that, I actually have a question for you. Do you want to hear the conclusion of my Microsoft tech support story?
I'm dying to hear the conclusion. But wasn't it oh, yeah. Well, you had to reinstall Office. Did the codes work that he gave you?
So before I get to that, I thought of everything before wiping my computer clean.
And you even called me just to say, did I think of everything? Name me, like you told me, like, give me things that I might have forgot. And I named you like 10 things. And you're like, yeah, I got that. And then you're like, okay, I guess I'm going to push the button. You know?
I pushed the button. There was one thing that I forgot. I didn't realize.
Which is what?
The version of Microsoft Office that I had on that computer was 2013. I didn't realize that it would be so difficult to find an old version of Microsoft Office, because when you go to the Microsoft website, all they offer you is the new version. I don't want the new version. And in fact, I don't even know if the product key that I have would have worked with the new version.
It might not. So how did you find it?
So I had to call Microsoft again. I called them again and I said, look, I need Microsoft Office 2013. I don't want the new version. I don't care if it's better. I want the old version. And so the guy actually sent me an email with the link to that version.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they have it, obviously. They
have it, but it's not on their site.
But then the keys worked? The key worked?
I put in the product key and it tells me that the product key is not valid for this version of Microsoft Office.
Oh my God.
However, I just click on X to that error message,
and then it works,
and everything worked. Anyway, do you have any listener mail?
Mailbag.
Yeah, I got a bunch of listener mail. Actually, we got a new listener, my sister.
Oh, that's great.
I think all the times we talked about sports, she just ignored the show. But when she saw Seinfeld, and then when she saw songs with people's names, she clearly has listened to the last 2 episodes. So she told me that some Seinfeld episodes that we left off is The Betrayal, which is really a bad episode. You know, that's the one where they go to India for the wedding.
Yeah, I didn't like that episode at all.
No, it's terrible. The Rye, you know, when he steals the marble rye from the old lady.
That one's not bad.
And the Junior Mint.
That one's not bad.
Which I think we mentioned the Junior Mint maybe in the honorable mentions.
I think we did.
Yeah. She also mentioned a bunch of songs. Mona Lisa and Mad Hatters by Elton John, Jolene. She says it's by Miley Cyrus, but I didn't have the heart to tell her that it's actually Dolly Parton. Steve McQueen by Sheryl Crow, Romeo and Juliet by Indigo Girls, and then Rhiannon by Fleetwood Mac. And now a lot of those are like historical figures, which we sort of discounted, you know, like Mona Lisa and, you know, like Romeo and Juliet, so whatever. Matt Sanderson in British Columbia told me that his all-time favorite song with the person's name is, and he says it's not even close, is a song that I barely remembered, and I actually had to look it up. It's called Vincent by Don McLean. You know Don McLean, American Pie.
I know Don McLean. I don't know Vincent.
And the Don McLean, the singer, not the guy who used to play on UCLA.
Right.
But yeah, anyways, I when I heard the song, I knew I had heard it before, but I mean, obviously it's a little bit obscure. And Mark from Philadelphia mentioned 8675309 Jenny.
I know that song.
And he was a little annoyed with me that Sweet Caroline didn't make my top 7, considering I'm a Red Sox fan, and I had to sort of tell him, well, you know, it's the way it goes.
Actually, I would have had, I forgot about Sweet Caroline until you mentioned it. I would have had it higher on my list too.
Mm-hmm. And actually, this goes back to the food episode, and I will post a link on our website or in the show description. Mark in Philadelphia ordered St. Viator bagels to Philadelphia through this website.
Did they arrive?
Yeah, it took a month for them to come, he said. They weren't, you know, he said, like, the order took a month. He said the bagels were fresh. They were shipped, they were shipped and 2 days later he got them. Like they were fresh bagels when they were shipped, but took a month for the website to process the order somehow, which is absolutely ridiculous. But apparently it's not just a Montreal thing, like the website you mentioned about the guy who's driving from Toronto to Montreal to get food, but it's like a website where you can get like foods from anywhere. So I do have to check it out, because like imagine if you could order like like what's like the famous barbecue restaurant in like Kansas City or Nashville, and then they're going to send you the food. Like obviously they're not going to send it to Canada. I guess that's a bit of a problem, but
Can you order fish and chips from London?
I don't know. I'm going to go check it out. I just saw the link and I didn't really browse it, but apparently like they'll get you any kind of food you want, from famous restaurants and stuff. So that's listener mail.
Top 7 sports announcers.
Okay, so I guess we're ready to start our list, and this was your topic, so that means you have to go first.
Yeah. It was a tougher list than I thought it was going to be to make. And now we kind of have like this wide open ground rules for sports announcers. Like we said, play-by-play, color, anything goes, right? Sideline reporters if you want, I guess, right? Although mine, I think, are all exclusively play-by-play people, more or less. I believe they are. And it was hard. And I don't know, should I tell you my honorable mentions first to sort of tell you who's not on my list, or maybe we'll save it for the end? But
I think we'll save the honorable mentions for the end. But one thing I'll say is this actually was pretty easy for me. There were 8 people that I thought of right away.
yeah.
So I only had to eliminate one.
The interesting thing is when you search up like best sports announcers ever, like on the internet, if you just want to do a really cursory search, a broad search,
Yeah.
there's no hockey announcers in those. And obviously hockey announcers for us is important, right?
Right. Well, that's why I don't go by what I found on the internet. I just go by what I know.
Yeah, no, I did like a bunch of searching to try to refresh my memory on the different sports, like hockey, who's the best hockey, who's the best baseball, football, basketball, And actually many of the people on my list are multi-sport, which is pretty amazing. And you forget that they were multi-sport, some of them. I have a feeling that we're going to have one person, we have at least one in common. And if we don't have at least one in common, we have a problem, right?
There's a problem.
Because I feel like there's one obvious one here. But let's see. I have a feeling like the lists are going to really vary. So my number 7 is Bob Cole. Now, I don't know if he's on your list or not. And I feel bad for Bob Cole. You're reacting like so badly. How come? You hate him or what?
I can't believe he's even on your list.
Josh, he gets a bad rap because he ended his career on a really low note, right? Like all the broadcasts he was on, they put him in a really bad position. But you forget, this man broadcast every Stanley Cup final from 1980 to 2008. Like he's literally the voice of generations and generations of hockey. He's broadcast hockey in the Olympics and, the 2002 Olympics. He has many, many famous calls. And he was also saddled with a horrible color commentator for most of those years in Harry Neale, and had to overcome that to become the broadcaster that he is. The last Canadian team to win the Stanley Cup final, and you've heard the clip millions of times.
And now a 24th Stanley Cup banner will hang from the rafters of the famous Forum in Montreal. The Canadians win the Stanley Cup.
That's a great call.
Fair enough. Listen, I'm not going to, judge your list. It's your list.
That's it. You can judge. I don't mind. But your reaction, like, people can't see because we're on, like, a video chat right now. But, like, your reaction when I said Bob Cole was like, you thought I'm out of my mind. Wait till you hear the rest of my list.
Okay. Am I at number 7 now?
Yeah.
Okay. Number 7 for me is Booger McFarland from ESPN Monday Night Football.
Wait. I thought we're doing the top 7 good best sports announcers.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Then I have to change my list completely. Sorry. I thought we were doing the worst.
Okay. You really scared me there. He is actually the worst.
Okay. Then forget this. Let me scrap that list and go to my other list. Okay. So number
very
7
funny,
then.
Josh. Very funny, Josh. You got me for a second there.
Number 7 then on my list is Billy Packer. Billy Packer is no longer involved with college basketball or CBS Sports, but he was for many, many years. And a lot of people actually did not like Billy Packer. And the reason they didn't like him is the reason I liked him, is because he actually told you what was going on. He didn't sugarcoat things. A lot of color commentators, they try to, I don't know, smooth things over because they don't want to be too critical of the players or the coach for that matter. But Billy Packer was not like that. He'll say, oh, the coach shouldn't have done this or the player shouldn't have done that.
I don't have any interest in what people think about me in 50 years from now. Matter of fact, in my family, which is really neat, we don't ever even talk about stuff like that. So I have no interest in what people think or be remembered. I had a great time, great run with the game, and that's just how I approach it.
And also, I learned a lot about college basketball because of Billy Packer. That's when I started to watch college basketball for the first time, and I didn't know anything about it. And I actually learned a lot from just listening to him.
He was a tremendous color commentator for NCAA.
I was disappointed when he left CBS. Now, whether he left voluntarily or they pushed him out, I don't know. You can look it up, and there's different stories. But I really liked him, and I think he was an asset to the broadcast.
They haven't adequately replaced him, actually. So on the last few years of March Madness, they really haven't, and it's lacking. Like him not there we miss him, for sure.
By the way, his full name, he was born in 1940. His full name is Anthony William Pakowski.
Oh wow, didn't know that.
So there you go. He did college basketball for more than 3 decades.
Yeah, that's it. So my number 6, you're going to think it's a little bit obscure, right? But like I said, I tried to look at hockey announcers because hockey's important to us. And obviously I've came in with Bob Cole. And I was thinking, actually, I've listened to more hockey games in French and watched more hockey games in French than I have in English probably in my life. And people outside of Quebec and in the United States are going to wonder, how is that possible? Because for many years, sometimes we just had the French broadcast. And then for many, many years, the French broadcast was better than the English broadcast, especially when it was on Saturday night. So I'm going back a bit in time because this person retired when I was a teen, but it's René Lecavalier. And I don't know how much you remember René Lecavalier, and I had to refresh my memory by watching all the different clips. But he was basically the French announcer for Hockey Night in Canada forever, right? He was the first French broadcaster on Le Soirée du Hockey, the French version of Hockey Night in Canada, in 1952, and he retired in 1985. And he actually came out of retirement in 87 to do Rendezvous 87, the NHL versus Russia series. And everybody remembers and hears those famous calls from the 72 Summit Series with Paul Henderson's goal. Well, he broadcast them in French also, and his calls are equally amazing in French, right? So, I mean, he's a legend in French broadcasting. He's in all kinds of Hall of Fames for broadcasting. And we talk about, and I don't know if they're going to be in your list, but we've often talked about how the French baseball announcers for the Expos have been largely credited with creating the language of baseball in French. But you forget that this guy, René Lecavalier, he created the French language of hockey. He invented many terms, many things that we hear now that are commonplace, and for something so simple as the term "il lance et compte," that was his signature phrase. That's René Lecavalier. So that's number 6 on my list.
Voici Rousseau qui accélère au centre. En zone advance, un beau jeu. Il est devant, il lance et compte!
That's an excellent name. That's an excellent announcer. You really picked up your game from number 7 to number 6. I'm very impressed.
Okay, good. Wait till you hear my number 5. I think you're not going to be impressed.
So number 6 for me, sticking with college basketball, is Gus Johnson. Now, Gus Johnson, unfortunately, does not work for CBS anymore. If he still did, he would probably be higher on my list. He now works for Fox, and he still does some college basketball games. He also does college football games, but I don't watch Fox hardly at all. So I don't get to see or hear Gus Johnson pretty much anymore. When he was doing March Madness, it seemed like he always had the best games. Now, you never know if a game's going to be good or not until the game's over.
Yeah.
I guess he was lucky that he had a lot of buzzer beater games. But watching a game that he does, it just seemed like a way more interesting game, a way more exciting game, because he always gets so into it. I wish he never left CBS either.
Shot clock turned up. Game clock at 8. He's going to do it himself. Thomas, shake, crossover, step back. At the buzzer, Young, safe, and Washington wins it. On a last-second J. Cold-blooded.
Gus Johnson is like, of the current play-by-play, and I'm saying current because it's now. He is definitely the best play-by-play announcer out there and he does multi-sport, right? I think we don't see him because he's probably doing, who knows if he's doing college football or whatever, but like this guy is a pro, like he could play-by-play, like, snowman building, and make it exciting.
That's true. He's
right?
very enthusiastic. And
yeah.
Again, so this is the second guy who left CBS.
Yeah.
That I was disappointed. And I know why he left, because he wasn't the number one guy at CBS, and I don't blame him. But I really like him.
So my number 5, and like speaking of the number one guy at CBS, my number 5 is Jim Nantz. Now, you had Billy Packer on your list. Now for all the people not watching the video feed, Josh just held his hands up to his face in doubt and in shock. But like, if you could have Billy Packer, how come I can't have Jim Nantz? Like,
you can have Jim Nantz, absolutely. I have no problem with that.
I mean, he's like, just like I said, Gus Johnson is a consummate pro. Like, Jim Nantz is the consummate professional. March Madness, how many finals and Final Fours has he broadcast? And mostly with Billy Packer. We have great memories of Jim Nantz calling a lot of Duke games, that's for sure. And I know we're not fans of golf, but I mean, he's the voice of the Masters, and like his signature opening of the Masters and golf telecasts is "Hello, friends," this. So, he's, he's also the number one guy on CBS for NFL, right? Like he's the number one guy for NFL. Like he's their go-to guy. Football, golf, NCAA basketball. So like, I just think he's the consummate professional who can kind of broadcast anything, and he doesn't oversell it when he broadcasts. Like he just calls the games.
There's one thing I don't like about him. He'll always use like a corny line. For example, I think
absolutely.
when the Yukon Huskies won the NCAA championship, he's like, and Yukon is the top dog. Like he always does something like that in every game or every broadcast, and that's a little annoying to me.
That's his signature. He comes up with corny stuff. He does it on purpose, right? Yeah.
A tradition unlike any other. The Masters on CBS.
So that's why he's not on my list. So anyway.
Your number 5.
So number 5 for me, and this is going to be now the third college basketball guy in a row, is Jay Bilas.
Oh,
I really like Jay Bilas. First of all, I've actually met Jay Bilas, and he's really nice. But aside from that, Jay Bilas went to Duke University, played college basketball there, also was an assistant coach at Duke, and happens to be a lawyer. But similar to why I like Billy Packer, when you're watching a game that Jay Bilas does, I find that you actually learn something about the game or about the players or about the coaches when Jay Bilas is talking about them. He knows his stuff. Not only that, even when he's not doing a game, when he's just being interviewed about various topics, like the one and done rule, for example, he tends to have the right opinion. There's a lot of people who think that there's problems with college basketball. Players are only playing one season. Some players aren't even playing at all. They're going straight to the pros or going there straight to the G League. And Jay Bilas has some, I think, good ideas on how to correct these issues. No one seems to be listening to him. If there was going to be a commissioner of college basketball, there isn't, but if there was going to be one, it should be Jay Bilas.
I used to say there's no such thing as a student athlete. Like I'm a student when I'm in class, and I'm an athlete when I'm playing. So when at the NCAA tournament, when they have a post-game press conference, they say questions for the student athletes. Like, come on, man, they're players. Just say player.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. He's like you said about Billy Packer, in that sometimes he's not afraid to just offend people by telling the truth. That's what he does. Although there's many, many Duke haters that will tell you the opposite of what you said, in that they find that when he's broadcasting the Duke game, he's such a homer. But I mean, I think people look at the telecast through their own lens, so to speak.
I don't think he's a homer. He's called out Duke players when they've made mistakes
absolutely.
and stuff like that.
So my number 4, Josh, and again, I'm going way back in time to when we were kids and teens. And I don't know if this guy even crossed your mind, but he is Howard Cosell. He's on my list, not because he was necessarily a great announcer, but like if you're talking about someone who was one of a kind, like had his own style, his own way of doing things, that's him. You know, he was aggressive, he was confident, he was brash, he called people out. I mean, obviously he's very, very famous for boxing, and he had this sort of athlete journalist relationship with Muhammad Ali that kind of made him famous. But I mean, he really was famous for Monday Night Football. When Monday Night Football came to prominence in the 70s as this massive television show that revolutionized how sports was being broadcast, that was Howard Cosell, and he was part of that, you know. And one of the most famous games actually was December 8th, 1980. I don't know if you know what I'm going to say, but the day that John Lennon was killed, Howard Cosell announced it on the air during the Monday Night Football game, and it's quite emotional.
An unspeakable tragedy confirmed to us by ABC News in New York City. John Lennon, outside of his apartment building on the west side of New York City, the most famous perhaps of all of the Beatles, shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Hard to go back to the game after that news flash, which in duty bound we had to take.
So all that to say, I mean, there's many lists that have him as one of the most important and top broadcasters ever. So he's number 4 on my list.
I don't need to tell you, he was very polarizing. So a lot of people liked him, a lot of people didn't like him. And one week, I don't know if you remember this, Monday Night Football decided they were going to have no announcer at all just to see what would happen. And I think that game got the highest rating of any other Monday Night Football game that season.
Right. Well, I mean, people tuned in just to see what would happen, right? So it's not necessarily a fair experiment.
Number 4 for me is, now I'm going to hockey finally, is Chris Cuthbert. I really like Chris Cuthbert. I think that when he first started, he was doing a lot of those Western games with the Oilers and the Flames and the Canucks, and those games were really exciting, and I used to actually stay up late enough to watch those games back then when I was younger. And I just found that anytime he did a game similar to Gus Johnson in college basketball, Chris Cuthbert always made the game more interesting or more exciting, even if it wasn't really that exciting a game. But he would always do the late game. I would always stay up to watch the late game, especially during the playoffs. Now he's the main guy on Rogers Sportsnet, and we're going to actually get to hear him in about a week or two.
Well, I will.
So, right. Well, I have the option of resubscribing to my sports channels. He's also he did the 2010 Winter Olympics in Vancouver.
He's on the ice with a Ginla. A Ginla scores! Sidney Crosby, the golden goal! And Canada has once in a lifetime Olympic gold!
Yeah, he's a tremendous hockey announcer. He didn't make my top 7. He's on my honorable mention, and I knew he was going to be in your list. I mean, I know you're a huge fan of his. So
I really am. I also met him once. That's not why he's on my list, but just I really do enjoy when he's doing a game. Not to mention, he also does football.
So my number 3 could have been 2. Anyways, I kept him at 3. Is Bob Costas. Now, I don't know if he made your list or not, but like, to me, Bob Costas is synonymous with baseball. He's sort of like the conscience of baseball. He's like, when you talk about a purist, it's like, that's Bob Costas, you know, a guy who likes the game. He has a lot of nostalgia about how the game used to be, how it should be. But like, we always forget, like, I mean, I think of baseball first when I think of Bob Costas. But I mean, he's been the host of NBC's Olympic coverage forever. He's done the finals of the NBA on NBC. Like, he does tons of basketball play-by-play also. So he is a talented announcer. Other than Vin Scully and Joe Garagiola, they used to do the game of the week. Then later on, it was Bob Costas and Tony Kubek, and they did a great job themselves, and they had big shoes to fill there, you know? There's lots of stories about Bob Costas, you know, like he had so many memorable calls, and like, actually, like, you forget, like, he did the play-by-play of the 98 NBA Finals with Michael Jordan against the Jazz, like Jordan's last championship, like and Jordan's last game as a Bull, and Phil Jackson's last game as a Bull. Like, that's like, he called that.
Here comes Chicago. 17 seconds. 17 seconds from Game 7 or from championship number 6. Jordan open. Chicago with the lead.
I love Bob Costas. I think I love anytime I hear him talking about baseball. Just talking about baseball. I love to sit down with this guy one day and have lunch and just talk about baseball.
So that's a good choice. He's not on my list. He was on my honorable mentions. The only reason, I guess, that he's not on my list, well, I could only pick 7. But the other thing was, I actually heard him do a game last year on the MLB Network, and I have to say, he's lost a bit of his luster.
Yeah. No, I'm sure he has. Yeah, I'm sure he has. But I'm glad that he's on MLB Network and he's come back to baseball after all these years of, other things. So
I think he may have written a book also about baseball, if I'm not mistaken.
Probably more than one, no?
Right, but I'm referring to one specific book where in it he mentions that, and this was when the Expos still existed, he mentions that the league should contract the Expos because they were bringing the league down. So that annoyed me, but that's just a personal thing.
Bad feelings, yeah.
Number 3 for me is Danny Gallivan. Danny Gallivan retired in 1984, and he did every Stanley Cup final until he retired. So that's why I'm not so sure about what you said about Bob Cole earlier.
Well, he was right there on my list, Josh, and obviously, like, I included Randy LeCavalier, who was the same era as Danny Gallivan for part of it, but I mean, I was a little bit young in the Danny Gallivan era, to be honest.
So was I. But of course, Danny Gallivan had a lot of these expressions that he made up on his own, cannonading, for example. And
Savardi and Spinorama.
Right. And again, you're right. I was very young and I didn't get to listen to Danny Gallivan, I guess, in his prime, because by the time I was watching, he was already towards the end of his career. Yeah. But nonetheless, he did all the Montreal Canadiens games, and I think he did them from, I don't know, he did it for 32 years on Hockey Night in Canada, which is quite a career. And I just like his voice, and I liked listening to him. And again, this is when I was very young and impressionable, so it's still stuck in my brain.
55 seconds left in the penalty, a minute and 27 seconds left in regulation time. Boston 4, Montreal 3. Lafleur coming out rather gingerly on the right side. He gives it into Lemaire, back to Lafleur. Oh!
Definitely, like, I have memories of listening, obviously, but not more recent ones, let's just say.
He's also the only person on my list that is no longer alive.
Oh, wow. Good choice, Josh. Very good choice. So if you face palm some of my other choices, I can't wait for this one. My number 2, I cheated. I have a duo.
That is cheating. That is not allowed.
So it's Pat Summerall and John Madden. Now, like, whereas, like, we talked about how some of the other announcers did multi-sports and different things. I'm only counting Madden, Summerall. They're one thing, and it's just the years, the 22 seasons that they broadcast the NFL starting in 1981. You forget, like, do you know Pat Summerall? He was actually an NFL player, right? He was a kicker.
I think I knew that.
Yeah, and obviously Madden was the coach of the Raiders. To me, these guys are the voice of the NFL. Like, when I started watching football, that's when these guys started. And, like, all the years that I followed football so closely, through the 80s and 90s, like, that's who I listened to.
John and I both have been here in Chicago pretty much all week, and if you read the papers or watch television or listen to the radio, McMahon is the name most frequently heard. Why, John, do you think he makes such a big difference to this ball club?
He just has that ability, Pat, whatever it is, to win football games. If you look at him, he's not the biggest guy, he's not the strongest guy. Sometimes he doesn't even throw a spiral.
When you talk about, like, copying someone is like the biggest form of flattery, like, every other network and every other broadcast in every other sport was like, we need to find our own Madden and Summerall. Like they realized that this duo thing was working, right? Like the way they played off of each other, and every other sports broadcast tried to find their duo, and no one ever lived up to these guys, to be honest, as a duo. So, I mean, I know in the end, Madden became like kind of like a caricature of himself. He was outrageous in the things he used to say, and I think he used to say them on purpose to sound silly and exaggerated, but like, you forget like what a great football analyst he was. You know, like honestly, like this guy would break down the game. Like you said, you started watching college basketball when Billy Packer was explaining you stuff. I remember watching football and John Madden was explaining to me how the offensive line was blocking and where the running back was going to hit the holes. And I was like, holy crap, what is going on here? You know, like, so that's my number 2.
So this is why I'm not happy that you combined 2 people into one, because now you're actually going to get 8. And had I known I could do that, this guy who's number 2 on my list, I would have combined him with Danny Gallivan, because it's Dick Irvin. And Dick Irvin and Danny Gallivan worked together for I don't know how many years. They were basically inseparable. And then when Gallivan retired, Dick Irvin continued to work. Dick Irvin is one of the few guys, only one on my list, but one of the few guys that would do, he did color commentary, he also did play-by-play, and he also did the intermissions. In fact, there were a few years where he had to do the the color commentary and the intermission. So he would miss the beginning and the end of every period because he had to go from upstairs in the rafters down to where they did intermission. And he'd miss the beginning and the end of every period. You'd never see that in this day and age.
To me, Dick Irvin was like the hardest working guy in broadcasting, because like the country only saw him or heard him on Saturday nights. But what they didn't know is that he was doing the radio broadcasts also.
Exactly.
For all the games in between.
Welcome to the Montreal Forum and our continuing Hockey Night in Canada coverage of the Stanley Cup playoffs. Good evening, everybody. This is Dick Irvin speaking to you from our Montreal Forum studios, in a city where the word surprise is heard over and over again when it comes to the performance of the local team in the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Had I done the same thing as you and combined Gallivan and Irvin together as one, I could have included one more person on my list. But that's okay.
We'll get to your honorable mentions and maybe we'll promote someone, no?
Well, we could. So Dick Irvin's number 2 on my list. He's also, by the way, he's the Hockey Hall of Fame presented him with the Foster Hewitt Memorial Award. Foster Hewitt was obviously a very famous play-by-play guy in Canada for hockey. You can't get a better award than that. And he was also inducted into the Canadian Association of Broadcasters Hall of Fame. He graduated from McGill University in Montreal. So from the late 70s through the 80s, he acted as both the color commentator and studio host for Hockey Night in Canada.
No, he was awesome, and it's a worthy choice. And sorry I screwed you by making Madden and Summerall together.
That's
so
okay,
I think our number 1 is going to be the same, and I really hope it is.
Well, we don't have any the same so far.
So my number 1 is Vin Scully. So, and you're smiling because now I'm not sure he's on your list. So, like, you know, he was the voice of the Dodgers for 67 seasons. Now think about that. He started broadcasting for the Dodgers in 1950, and he only retired in 2016. Now, we talked about him doing the Game of the Week on TV with Joe Garagiola. He was fantastic. He worked for multiple networks and whatever. So, like, the thing about Vin Scully for me is there's, like, 3 huge plays, like, in the history of sports, right, that he called. And it's like, so when you think about the greatest plays you've ever seen or the most important plays you've ever seen, he's synonymous with that. So I'm talking about the Kirk Gibson home run in the World Series off of Dennis Eckersley. That call is brilliant. Now, I just rewatched it to do the research for this show. He says, she's gone. Ball goes over the fence. Then he doesn't speak for over a minute and just lets the viewer listen to the crowd. And then finally he says, in a year that's been so improbable, the impossible has happened, which is an incredible call.
In a year that has been so improbable, the impossible has happened.
Now, he also called the Bill Buckner game, which, like, you've seen over and over and over, and his voice is probably burned in people's memories. Sorry, Red Sox fans, but, like, little roller up along first, it gets by Buckner. Like, that's an incredible call. And now the third call that I'm going to tell you, you probably don't even realize that he broadcast, was Joe Montana to Dwight Clark, the catch. He called that game. And there's circumstances why he called it, and it's because anyways, I researched it, and it's like the number one team, which was Hank Stram, and someone, like, they flew with them already. They were getting ready for the Super Bowl, so they had the number 2 team doing the championship game, which is weird. That would never happen now. So anyways, that's Vin Scully. Like, he's just synonymous with, like, being the best announcer. You know, what do you want to say about it? You know.
You forgot to mention that he did the Tim Raines game when Tim Raines missed the first month of the season and came back to play with having no spring training. And I think he hit for the cycle, including a grand slam in extra innings.
Not the cycle, not the cycle, but almost, yeah.
Right, but he did hit a grand slam in extra innings against the Mets to win the game.
Yeah,
Vin Scully did that game as well. As an
Expo fan, that's a huge call, right? But like so many games of the week, like when you remember when we were like, when the Expos were on the game of the week, it was huge, right? It was like such a treat, you know.
So I'm happy to tell you that we have not one announcer the same on our list at all. Not one.
So Vin Scully's not on your list.
He's in my honorable mentions.
Okay, so like he would have been number 7 if you could have included.
Actually, no, he would have been. No, he would have been, like, because I actually ranked them. He would have been, you know, around number 10, 11, 12.
I can't wait to hear number 1, like Tony Romo.
Definitely not. Number 1 for me. It's very obvious to me, it's Dave Van Horn. Dave Van Horn was clear-cut number 1 for me because, first of all, he was with the Expos for 20-something years.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, growing up in Montreal, listening to Dave Van Horn on the radio, he's the voice of every summer that I ever had in Montreal.
I agree wholeheartedly. Dave and Duke, like, that represents sitting outside in your backyard with the radio on, listening to the Expos. For me, that's right.
He worked with Duke Snider for 14 years, and then he had a bunch of other clowns working with him. But Dave Van Horn was the best. First of all, I love his voice. Second of all, he really knows his baseball. Third, he would say, again, you know, if the manager made a mistake or if a player made a mistake, he'd say it. He wasn't one of these homer announcers. A lot of teams have these homer announcers that will never say anything bad about their own team. Dave Van Horn wasn't like that, which is another thing I liked about him. He also, of course...
The advent of the homer announcer is even more present now, don't you find? Like, current announcers?
For sure.
Like the guy who does Jack Edwards of the Bruins, or like Ken Harrelson on the White Sox. These guys are like, they're the ultimate homers, no? It's part of their persona, you know? Like, whereas Dave Van Horn was just like a great announcer, no?
For sure. I mean, of course, he also called the Dennis Martinez perfect game. Yeah. And he always signed in, he always started the broadcast this way. Thanks, Duke, and hi again, everybody. Glad to have you aboard for today's game. And, of course, his home run call, Up, Up, and Away, which later on, Jonah Carey wrote a book called Up, Up, and Away.
That ball is up, up, and away. A home run for Gary Carter.
Yeah. Up, Up, and Away was a tremendous signature home run call, for sure.
Now, I don't know if you knew this fact. I don't want to say that it's little known because everyone knows it, but maybe you don't remember. So you know Dave Van Horn eventually went to work for the Marlins.
I thought he's still doing the Marlins games now.
I think he is still doing the Marlins games now. But funny enough, Van Horn actually did the last Expos home game in Montreal from the Marlins broadcast booth as a Marlins broadcaster. So just a coincidence.
I've played that clip before, no? You know that clip where he's naming all the players?
Yes, it's a great clip. It's in that song by Anakin Slade. So there's my list.
You just made the list!
All right, so good list, Josh. It's amazing. We didn't have any of the same at all?
Not one.
Jesus.
That's because I have no football or basketball. I have no football or NBA basketball in mind.
So, so I have some, in no particular order, some that didn't make my list that I have written as the honorable mentions. Al Michaels, Marv Albert. He has his signature call for NBA games. You know, yes. Brent Musburger, Dave Van Horn, as you said. I mean, the voice of our summer, basically, right? And you said there was a bunch of clowns after Duke Snider, but Ken Singleton was really good.
I do like Ken Singleton very much.
Yeah. Joe Garagiola. Chris Cuthbert was on my list. He made your list. Danny Gallivan was on my honorable mentions. Foster Hewitt. And then I also had Jacques Doucette.
Very nice. So here's my honorable mentions. I really wanted to include Mike Doc Emmerich. It was very close. I almost included him in my top 7, but he's number 8. I really like him. I put Ron McLean here. Ron McLean does a good job. Another guy who actually, he only was really in the broadcast booth for 1 season, but I found him comical, and that's Tony Kornheiser. Another one that I put on the list again is Bill Walton. If you ever watch a game that Bill Walton does, I think he is on something every time he's doing a game because he's talking about things that have nothing to do with basketball.
Oh yeah, he's definitely on something.
And this is another guy who, again, he's over the top completely and sometimes talks about the game, but he is somewhat entertaining, and that's Dick Vitale. And here's another guy who didn't take things too seriously, and that's what I liked about him, Bob Uecker. The last guy I will mention is Roger Brulotte.
The Skip and Josh podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. If you listen to the show through Apple Podcasts, please leave a review. To interact with the show, send an email to skipandjoshtshow@gmail.com. Follow the show on Twitter @skipandjosh, and go to facebook.com/skipandjosh to like the show page. To see links mentioned on today's episode, go to skipandjosh.com. And now for some final thoughts from the guys.
I'm sure you heard this news, but with all these sports leagues starting up now, baseball started yesterday or 2 days ago, and hockey and basketball are going to start in about a week or two. And then the NFL still thinks they're going to start on time, although I'm not sure how that's going to happen. But there's one player, Laurent Duvernay-Tardif of the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, who has already decided that he's opting out of this NFL season. Not necessarily because he's afraid that he's going to get sick, but the reason he's opting out is because he's also a doctor. And he said that he would rather continue his job as a doctor, helping people in Montreal during this time where doctors and nurses are overworked more than they already are under normal circumstances. So I just found that very interesting. Seems like a very bright, intelligent individual who graduated from McGill Medical School. He's only 29 years old. He could have a very long football career ahead of him if he wants.
And he still might.
And he still might
have to go by. Yeah.
But he has decided that he's not going to play this season.
Yeah, I could definitely congratulate him for doing that. And like my dad would say, he's a mensch. And people who don't know what that is can look it up. It's like he's a stand-up guy. You know, he's doing the right thing. He's doing the right thing for himself. If he wanted to go play, go play. Made his decision, you know? Yeah, speaking of sports starting, so I never thought I'd say this, but July 23rd, Josh, was opening day in Major League Baseball. This is the first time we're ever going to say that, right?
It's pretty crazy. And I haven't watched any baseball. And I just want to mention that we actually did do our fantasy baseball draft just this week, in fact.
Yeah.
I missed the draft. I did not attend. I let Yahoo draft for me, and Yahoo did a much better job of drafting than I would have done myself.
So what you're going to do right now is something that usually infuriates me, is you're going to follow baseball only through your fantasy draft and basically just by looking at box scores.
Well,
so you don't care about results of games. You don't care about like actual baseball. You just going to follow your guys.
Ever since the Montreal Expos left Montreal, that's exactly how I've been following baseball.
Okay, so it's no change. It's no change for you.
It's
anyway,
no different because I haven't had a favorite team since the Expos left Montreal. The only thing I ever cared about was my fantasy team in the years that I played fantasy baseball, because there were a bunch of years where I didn't play at all.
Yeah.
So
I do have a couple of little notes about the opening days, about the games, because I watched a bunch of games. Like I watched a few minutes of a bunch of games, flipping around the channels, and then I watched this morning. What is it called on MLB Quick Pitch? You know, where they go like through all the games.
Yes.
They show you what happened in different games. So there's many teams that they're not I mean, the stadiums are empty, obviously, but there's many teams that have these cardboard cutouts behind home plate that look like fans, and it's really funny. And the amazing thing is, so most teams are doing the same thing now. You can, as a fan, you can buy a cutout of yourself and put it in the stadium, right? So, and the teams are being cool about it because the money's going to the charities of the various organizations, you know, the Phillies Foundation or the Mets Foundation, whatever. But like, I watched the Dodgers game yesterday a little bit. They actually have, and it's because the people who usually sit behind home plate bought the cutouts themselves. So like Mary Hart, you know, she sits behind home plate. There's a cutout of Mary Hart right where she sits.
Is there one of Larry King?
I didn't see the one of Larry King, and I was really looking for it. But I mean, there's all these people there, and so I'm just waiting actually to see when we're gonna have the cutout of Marlins man somewhere in his bright green.
Well, you mean orange?
Orange, sorry, yeah.
Well, technically, he should be at every stadium because he's always at every game. In fact, sometimes you'll see him at one game at 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and then in a different city at 8 o'clock at night.
Yeah, you're right. And then the other note that I really thought was funny, and I really thought of you when I saw this on the highlights. So, you know, players usually carry some stuff in their back pocket, chewing tobacco, gum, their glove, their batting glove, whatever. Anthony Rizzo had a little container of hand sanitizer. He pulled it out of his back pocket. He gave it to the runner at first base. The guy washed his hands, gave it back to him, put it in his pocket.
I saw that, actually. That was funny.
This is where we are. This is where we are in like 2020. And I have one very, very short thing to end the show with, because you haven't asked me about this, and we're in the end of July.
It's funny. I know. Before you even say it, I was thinking about this just yesterday.
Yeah.
I think I know.
Song of the summer.
Yeah, I was going to say, is there still a song of the summer this year?
According to my wife, the song of the summer, and I never heard, this is how out of the loop I am, and I didn't hear the song until yesterday, and now I'm going to tell you the name of the song. You're going to say, I never even heard it. Is a song called Watermelon Sugar and by Harry Styles.
So if you never heard the song, then how could it be the song of the summer?
Well, I heard it only for the first time yesterday, but because I don't listen to the radio. Like, normally I'm in the car a little bit more, so you hear radio, like radio airplay, but I haven't been in the car, so like I'm just out of the loop. But according to my wife, that's the song of the summer.
Okay, well, she's the judge and jury, right? So there you go.
Yeah, usually my kids, I'm gonna ask Selena what she thinks, and she'll probably agree. All right, good show, Josh, and we'll speak next week.
Have a great week.